What happens when a secret reveals itself before thousands of eyes and no one involved was prepared for it? The night was electric. On a Saturday night in Los Angeles, the sound vibrated loudly in the packed stadium. Giant screens illuminated the emotional faces of the crowd, and a generation's favorite band was performing their most anticipated show of the year. Among tens of thousands of people, a young woman named Madison, 22, was taking photos and recording videos of the stage. She was with her friends, celebrating the end of the semester at college, when something else caught her attention. "Guys, is that Jason Miller?" she whispered to her friends, discreetly pointing toward one of the VIP areas. Jason Miller, CEO of Velmark Technologies, one of California's most powerful companies, businessman, recognizable face at charity events, and above all married. Madison recognized him immediately, but what left her unsettled wasn't his presence. It was who he was with. Next to Jason, a young blonde woman, visibly younger, was smiling, touching his arm, and at one point leaned in for a kiss. Jason didn't hesitate. He held her face with the same naturalness with which he presents innovations at global conferences, and kissed her in front of everyone. Madison, still in shock, recorded it, not so much for the kiss itself, but for the contrast. "Isn't this guy married?" asked one of her friends. "He is. To that writer, Emily, I think. They appeared together at a UNICEF event last year." The video was posted on TikTok the next day with an innocent caption, "Velmark CEO enjoying the show with his new girlfriend?" And there began what no one imagined, an avalanche of revelations, judgments, and pain that went beyond the scandal. The video exploded in minutes. Millions of views in less than 24 hours. Comments ranged from shocked to sarcastic. "Rich people don't even hide their extramarital affairs anymore," wrote one user. Others defended the right to privacy, but the question that lingered was, what about his wife? Behind the scenes of the Beverly Hills mansion, Emily Miller was about to find out in the worst way. Not through a phone call, not from a friend, but like any other person, through her phone screen. She was having coffee when a friend sent her the video link with the message, "Girl, have you seen this?" Emily clicked. And there, on the screen, was the man with whom she had shared her life for more than 12 years. The man with whom she had built dreams, endured crises, and made promises of eternity. But he wasn't alone, and in that video, he didn't look guilty either. Emily and Jason's story was worthy of an overcoming tale. They met in college, both from middle-class families. Jason had ambition. Emily had sensitivity. While he built businesses, she wrote poetry. They married young, with few resources and many plans. Emily abandoned her career as a teacher when his company began to grow. Someone needed to take care of the home, accompany the city moves, create stability. Over the years, Jason became the public face of Velmark, appearing on magazine covers, giving TEDx talks, being praised for humanizing the technology world. Emily, on the other hand, gradually disappeared from the spotlight. In photos, she was always beside him, but increasingly in the background. The concert video exposed more than a kiss. It revealed an invisible disconnection that many women know. The wife left behind, the partner who was forgotten, the woman who held things together while the world applauded the man who was now kissing another, and the internet, which at first only speculated, began to take a stand. It's not just about betrayal, it's about invisibility. How many Emilys exist out there, erased behind their husband's success? The video hurts, but not as much as knowing she had to see this along with the entire world. Meanwhile, Jason said nothing. No statement, no official note. The company also remained silent. It seemed like a strategy, wait for the dust to settle. But what they didn't know is that this story touched a much deeper wound than a simple celebrity scandal. It was about erased women, About wives betrayed not just by infidelity, but by silence, by indifference. In the following days, the video was analyzed on podcasts, live streams, and even TV shows. Who was the secret guest? Was it an old affair, an employee, a model? But the strongest question came from the mouths of women watching. And Emily, where is she? How is she? At that point, Emily was at home, scared, silent, broken. But something inside her was beginning to change. Jason Miller always knew how to present himself to the world. His suit always fitted, his smile trained, his voice firm and warm at the same time. He dominated stages and meetings as if he had been born for it, and in a way he was. An only child of a real estate broker in San Diego, Jason grew up hearing that he could be anything in the world, as long as he knew how to convince people. In college, he stood out not for technical genius, but for leadership ability. He was that student who organized groups, won oratory prizes, and knew exactly whom to associate with. It was there he met Emily. She wrote for the campus literary newspaper, shy but observant. Jason saw her as a gentle soul in a world of ambition. Emily saw him as someone who wanted to conquer the world, but who was still gentle enough to listen to her talk about Sylvia Plath. During their first years together, Jason seemed divided between two worlds, creation and connection. He always had good ideas, but his true strength was in bringing the right people together. He knew how to build teams. He knew how to sell dreams. And that's how Velmark Technologies was born, a startup that began in a cramped apartment, selling organizational software to small businesses. Over time, and a strategic combination of charisma and the right investors, the company exploded. And Jason, of course, became the face of it all. At events, he spoke about leadership with purpose. In promotional videos, he appeared hugging employees, encouraging mothers to return to the job market. On Twitter, he posted photos with phrases like, "There's no real success without respect for the people who helped you get there." The public believed it. Investors did too. Jason was the ideal CEO for a world seeking leaders with sensitivity, but what no one saw, or preferred not to see, was what happened off camera. Jason had always been obsessed with control. He liked to know what each employee thought, but rarely listened to criticism. He demanded loyalty. His team feared him in silence, even though they smiled in photos. With Emily, the early years were sweet. When he came home late, he brought flowers. When he traveled too much, he wrote notes. But over time, this changed. She began to feel the distancing before she even understood what it was. Jason said he needed to maintain his image, that she didn't need to worry about appearances because she was protected from everything. In reality, she was being erased. From social events, she was cut with excuses like, "This party is just for company partners." From decisions at home, she was gradually excluded, and when she asked something more serious, he deflected. "Emily, you're always doubting me now." "It's not that, Jason. It's that I don't recognize you anymore." "Maybe because you're stuck in time." That phrase, said during a cold dinner, echoed for months. Jason's image continued to shine in the public eye. He participated in panels on inclusion and representation. He donated to social causes. He hired image strategists to monitor his reputation. And behind all of this, he lived two lives. One with Emily, lukewarm, formal, almost silent, and another that the world was now beginning to discover. The concert video wasn't just a slip. For many, it was the first visible crack in a perfectly polished facade. For those who had already worked with him, it wasn't a surprise, but no one dared say it out loud. Until now. Behind the scenes at Velmark, the atmosphere was tense. Employees whispered in the hallways, trying to guess who the woman in the video was. Some had already seen her at the company headquarters in meetings with the communications team. Others said she had been promoted quickly, but the board tried to suppress it. Don't comment to the press. This is a personal matter. Jason is focused on strategic projects. Don't get distracted by gossip. The problem was that it was no longer gossip. It was public, and it had a name, face, and real consequences. At the Miller house, Emily still didn't know what she would do. She didn't leave the house, didn't give interviews, didn't respond to journalists' requests. But she began to dig through old files, photos, notes, emails. She tried to understand where she had lost herself, or rather, where he had chosen to leave her behind. And the more she remembered, the more she realized Jason hadn't betrayed her just with hidden kisses. He had betrayed her with absence, with distant looks at dinners, with the rush to end conversations, with the brightness that used to be only hers, and was now cast upon other women, other audiences, other worlds. Jason's public image still resisted. But each new comment, each like on the video, each analysis made by women on social media made everything clearer. It wasn't just about the CEO, it was about what he represented, the admired man who, in the name of success, forgot who held his foundation. The husband applauded for being sensitive while erasing the woman who believed in him most. And for the first time, this facade was beginning to crack in public. The world no longer saw just the inspiring entrepreneur. They saw the man who betrayed not just his wife, but the trust of those who believed it was possible to be great, without stepping on others. Emily never wanted the spotlight. Since childhood, she preferred libraries to stages, long conversations to crowded parties. She grew up in Portland, daughter of a literature teacher and a neighborhood mechanic. Her parents taught her about dignity, listening, and patience, virtues that later became silent strengths in her married life. In college, she was known for writing deep poems, full of sensory images and silences that said more than words. When she met Jason, he made her laugh. She made him reflect. He talked about startups, investments, leadership. She talked about Virginia Woolf, silenced women, unsent letters. They completed each other, or so they seemed to believe. In the early days of marriage, she still wrote. She published a small book of chronicles that went unnoticed by critics, but moved those who read it. Jason bought 50 copies to distribute among friends. Proud, Emily believed they would grow together, he building companies, she building words. But gradually, she stopped writing. It wasn't a clear decision. It was the accumulation of small choices, or impositions disguised as partnerships. When Jason had the first big expansion proposal for Velmark, they needed to move to another city. Emily accepted. When travel intensified, he said he needed stability at home, and she held things together. When business dinners came, corporate events, she dressed up, smiled, stayed by his side, until the moment she wasn't even called anymore. It's going to be quick, just the financial sector people. You'll be bored, love. Better to rest. They already know you're incredible. You don't need to always be there. Sweet words. That gradually distanced her from everything. Emily began to disappear, not from the house, but from the world. Old friends called, and she said she was busy. She didn't want to tell them she no longer knew what to answer when they asked about her own projects. She herself had already forgotten what it was like to dream of something just for herself. Social media, once full of photos of the couple, began to show only Jason. On the company's Instagram, he was the inspiring leader. In magazines, the accessible genius. And her, gone, as if she didn't exist, as if she had never existed. Seeing the concert video was like looking from outside to inside and not seeing herself anywhere. Who was that smiling woman with him? Who was that version of Jason so free, so light, so intimate in public? Something that with her he would never allow. The kiss wasn't the worst. The worst was the smile he gave afterward. A smile of someone who felt safe, of someone who thought nothing, No one would have the courage to question him, and maybe he was right. Until now, Emily had never confronted him, but that morning, after watching the video for the third time, something she herself didn't know within her began to move. That same week, she received dozens of messages. Distant friends, women who had left their social circle, acquaintances from other times, all saying the same thing. "I saw the video. I'm thinking of you. You don't deserve to go through this. You were always strong, even in silence." These messages, read with teary eyes, began to reopen old memories. She remembered when she wrote a story about a woman who lived in the shadow of her politician husband. She remembered how she cried at the end, without knowing why. Now she knew. She had become her own story. For days, Emily avoided Jason. He didn't talk to her either. He pretended normalcy, as if nothing had happened. He got up early, left for work, dined in silence. But something changed in him too, a restless look, like someone who knows the castle is about to crumble, but pretends he's still king. Emily watched. She didn't want scandal. She didn't want headlines. She wanted answers, and she wanted, above all, to remember who she was before all this. One night she walked alone to the house's office. There, inside a forgotten drawer, she found her old notebooks, yellow pages scribbled with unfinished phrases, interrupted dreams. She flipped through them. "Read," cried. There she was, the woman who loved words, who wrote about feminine silences and daily resistances. She realized she had never stopped existing. She had just been silenced, for love, for fear, for convenience, but no more. The next day, she sent a short message to Jason. "I want to talk, and I no longer accept silence." And for the first time in a long time, Jason hesitated. Not with fear of scandal, but because maybe for the first time, he was seeing Emily. The video lasted only 23 seconds. Recorded from high in the stands of a packed Los Angeles stadium, it showed Jason Miller in a VIP area, arm in arm with a blonde woman, young, elegant, but completely unknown to the public. The two were laughing, sharing a drink, and in a moment that seemed choreographed by destiny itself, he leaned in to kiss her. Naturally, confidently, like someone who knows they're among allies, not spectators. The person filming, Madison, never imagined her video would change the course of so many lives. She just wanted to record a curious moment, a celebrity outside their usual environment, something informal, almost intimate. But what started as an unpretentious TikTok post with the caption, "Guys, is that Jason Miller with his new girlfriend, Daka Velmark CEO," became an unstoppable tsunami. In less than 12 hours, the video was already in every corner of the internet. On X, formerly Twitter, it accumulated thousands of reposts per minute. On Instagram, gossip accounts began trying to figure out who the woman was. On forums, lists emerged with possible candidates, influencers, ex-employees, recent interns. And while the internet played detective, the question dominating the comments was always the same. But isn't he married? He was. Jason and Emily Miller were known, albeit discreetly, as a stable couple. They participated together in charity events, interviews about work-life balance, campaigns about mental health in the corporate environment. The image was clear. He, the modern leader. She, the sensitive wife who helped him keep his feet on the ground. The problem was that now this image was in ruins, and the whole world was watching. The first public reactions were of astonishment. "Guys, I'm in shock with this Jason video. If it's true, he's another one of those who talk beautifully but live something else." And his wife? How must she be feeling? Some people still tried to defend. Nobody knows if they're still together. Maybe it's an open relationship. Personal life is nobody's business. But soon, screenshots, links, evidence emerged. Jason and Emily still appeared together at recent events. No official statement about separation. No hint that this was consensual. The pressure increased, and Velmark's silence became deafening. Meanwhile, at the company headquarters in San Francisco, the atmosphere was one of damage control. Emergency meetings were called. Press advisors reviewed crisis protocols. The legal team assessed reputation risks. But Jason's order was clear: don't comment, it will pass. He believed that the speed of social media would be his ally, that in 2 days another scandal would emerge, another video would go viral, and everything would return to normal. But he underestimated a force much greater than his own public image: the solidarity of women with other invisibilized women. In closed Facebook groups, in influencer stories, in content creator videos, the tone began to change. It was no longer just gossip. It was denunciation. It was collective pain. It was recognition. Many wrote, "I am Emily. I lived with a man who erased me gradually. I saw myself in that video, not as the woman beside him, but as the one at home forgotten." Jason represents all those who rise in life, leaving their partner in the dark. The story transcended the couple. It gained social, emotional, symbolic contours. And Emily watched it all in silence. She saw the videos, read the comments, received messages from strangers. At first, she thought about deleting all social media, but something stopped her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She felt seen. It was at that moment that she decided to stop running from the truth. She called a trusted journalist friend and said, "I need to tell my version. Not about him, about me." Meanwhile, at Velmark, questions began to overflow into the company. Some employees wanted to know who the woman in the video was. Others said they had seen her in internal meetings. Rumors began that she was an intern promoted too quickly, that there were signs of favoritism, that maybe it wasn't the first time. But everything was denied. Everything was speculation. Jason still appeared at the office, head high, arms crossed, as if the world outside wasn't on fire. But inside, he knew. This time, it wouldn't be so easy to control the narrative. And then came the final blow in that cycle of silence. The public relations company that managed Velmark's image announced it was withdrawing from the contract. Reason: incompatibility with the team's ethical principles. The press saw it, published it, commented on it. And now the question changed from who is the woman in the video to how many women have already been silenced by men like him. Emily, on the other side of town, was preparing her interview. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to be heard. She wanted to tell the world what it meant to be erased with elegance, to be betrayed not just in body, but in existence. The video had changed everything, and it was just beginning. While the video accumulated millions of views, Jason Miller's life continued, at least externally, unchanged. He arrived early at Velmark headquarters, distributed automatic smiles, participated in meetings, avoided longer glances. Pretending normalcy was the tactic, the same one he had used for years at home. But deep down, Jason knew his fortress was cracking. And with each minute he remained silent, the thunder of the cracks increased. The press had already sent more than 20 requests for clarification. 3 business magazines, 2 national newspapers, and a TV station wanted to hear his side. But he refused them all. "If I speak now, I give it more fuel. Time will erase this." That's what he told the board. But time in that case was not his ally. On the contrary, with each hour new videos emerged. Emotional reactions, social analyses, testimonies from women who felt represented by Emily. While Jason bet on silence, the world spoke for him, and none of the speeches favored him. On the internet, the case already had a name: the kiss of invisibility. Influencers, psychologists, and journalists used the expression to talk not just about the love scandal, but about the pattern. Women who build, support, sustain, and are discarded without ceremony when they become uninteresting. Videos with titles like, "It's not about betrayal, it's about erasure." Why does the Emily Miller case touch us so much? Spread like wildfire. And ironically, what most infuriated the public wasn't the kiss. It was the silence. Emily felt this. The weight of so many years in the background began to dissolve under a new light. She was now the center of the conversation, not for the pain, but for what she represented. The woman who doesn't scream, but who also no longer accepts being silenced. On the morning she decided to give the interview, she wore a light blue blouse, light makeup, hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wanted to look as she always had, authentic, contained, but firm. Before leaving the house, she wrote in her notebook, "The silence he imposed on me will be the same that now condemns him." While Emily prepared to speak, Jason met with Velmark's advisors. The tension was palpable. One of the advisors, a grey-haired man with decades of experience, spoke calmly. "Jason, it's not just about your personal life. It's about the culture we're transmitting. This is scratching the company's name." Jason defended himself. "There's no proof of anything. It was just a concert. There's no illegality." Another advisor, younger, retorted, "It's not about legality. It's about moral value. And you, today, represent everything we said we fought against." The room fell silent. Not the strategic silence that Jason mastered, but an uncomfortable silence, revealing, the kind of silence that precedes difficult decisions. Meanwhile, on social media, support for Emily took another proportion. Celebrities began to speak out, actresses, presenters, writers, all using the hashtag #IamEmily, not as a political banner, but as a collective outburst. In a video that surpassed 3 million views, a psychologist said, "You know why this bothers so much? Because all of us have already been left aside by someone who promised to love us." Emily's case exposes what many of us have lived in silence. Emily watched the video with teary eyes. She knew that now she no longer spoke just for herself. She spoke for voices that had been ignored for too long. Behind the scenes, Jason began to feel the tide change. Partnerships began to be suspended. Event guests refused to share the stage with him. Social campaign donors withdrew support. And still, he didn't speak. It was as if he was clinging to the idea that control would come with quietude. But the world no longer accepted men who control everything by silencing others. On the eve of Emily's interview, a reporter managed to find Jason leaving a meeting. "Jason, will you comment on the video?" He just pressed his lips together, gave a rehearsed half-smile, and got in the car without responding. The video of the non-response also went viral. It became a symbol of what women called the arrogance of the untouchables. Emily, on the other hand, was preparing to speak, and unlike him, she wouldn't use shields. No excuses, no intermediaries. She didn't want to turn her pain into spectacle. She just wanted to be heard, not as the betrayed wife, but as the invisible woman, who was now impossible to ignore. No one expected that the case of a discreet betrayal, recorded by chance, would become one of the biggest movements of female outburst of the last decade. But that's what happened. On the morning after Jason's public refusal to comment, something began to take shape on social media. It wasn't just likes or shares, it was testimonies, confessions, outbursts. Women of all ages, origins and professions began posting videos, texts and audios with the same opening phrase, "I was also Emily." A psychologist from New York recorded a simple video, phone in hand, teary eyes, saying, "I was the wife who left her career to accompany her husband. I also stopped writing, going out, being so he could shine. And in the end, I was also betrayed, not just with another woman, but with the daily abandonment of my existence." The speech went viral. More than 12 million views in 48 hours, thousands of comments, hundreds of women saying, "This video saved me today." Influencers began to adapt the content, Journalists did live streams explaining the emotional impact of the case, and relational psychology specialists pointed out a known pattern, but rarely discussed publicly: emotional abandonment in apparently stable marriages. It was as if Emily had opened a hidden window, and through it, thousands of female voices began to emerge, not as cries of revolt, but as echoes of a pain that until then was lived in silence. Meanwhile, Jason remained reclusive. His marketing team tried to assess the damage, but the numbers spoke for themselves. 17% drop in Velmark stock value in 1 week. Cancellation of 3 international conferences where he would be keynote speaker. Suspension of partnerships with 2 female NGOs he collaborated with. And most alarming, the irreversible loss of public trust. And still, no apology, no official statement. The only visible movement was the attempt to smother the flame, without understanding that the fire was no longer in his hands. Emily, on the other hand, saw all this with contained emotion. She never asked to be a symbol of anything, but she knew she now carried something bigger than her personal pain. Her messages were flooded. Women sent photos of old books, their own abandoned writing notebooks, shelved projects. "I went back to writing because of you. You reminded me that I'm still someone. Thank you for showing that our pain can have a voice." Emily read each one carefully, cried alone. Sometimes responded with emojis, other times with small excerpts from her texts, but always with something she had carried from the beginning: delicacy. It was then that the hashtag that would seal the movement emerged, created by an Australian teacher who went viral on X by writing, "I don't know Emily, but I've been her. I was silenced, diminished, and discarded. Today I am her, and we are many." The phrase became a t-shirt, digital art, protest poster. The name Emily became a symbol, not of betrayal, but of the erased woman who gradually returns to light. In an unexpected gesture, journalist Oprah Winfrey mentioned the case on her show, without sensationalism, with empathy. Emily's story isn't just about marriage. It's about how many women are taught to support, but not to exist. The audience applauded. And there, the case stopped being just a viral controversy. It became a milestone. That same day, Emily received a proposal to lead a female visibility campaign in partnerships with 3 foundations. She refused, for now. She wanted to wait, process, but made it clear, "I will no longer be silenced." At home, she began writing again, not to publish, but to rediscover herself. In an excerpt from the new notebook, she wrote, "I was forgotten, but I didn't disappear. I was silenced, but I still have a voice, and now, finally, they're listening to me." Jason, seeing the hashtag "We're All Emily" stamped on newspapers and magazine covers, felt for the first time that something completely escaped his control. It was no longer about him. It was about all the women he, and so many like him, had ignored. While the world knew and mobilized for Emily, another figure emerged between the lines of the story. Still unnamed, but already carrying symbolic and strategic weight. The woman in the video. Who was she? How did she appear in Jason's life? Why would he, so careful with his image, risk everything by being seen with her in public? The answer, as would soon be revealed, was more uncomfortable than many expected. On the corporate forum Tech Insider, an anonymous user posted, "The girl in the video is called Claire Whitmore, communication intern at Velmark until last year. She was promoted twice in 6 months." The message was quickly deleted, but not before being screenshotted and shared by hundreds of internet users. Other ex-employees began commenting, still anonymously. She was always in meetings with Jason, even without a defined function. She received light tasks, but was a constant presence on company trips. Nobody said anything because he protected her. The information reached the press. Corporate behavior investigators began searching through internal documents. And what was previously just an emotional scandal now took the form of possible professional favoritism and abuse of power. Claire Whitmore, 27 years old, graduated in digital marketing from a mediocre Florida university, was hired as an intern in January of the previous year. By April, she had already been promoted to junior analyst. By August, she became executive strategic image consultant, a position that, according to internal sources, didn't even exist before she occupied it. Salary, triple that of any other employee in the same bracket. Responsibilities, few, confusing reports, presence at events. International trips alongside the CEO. Velmark's board, under pressure, tried to justify. She showed exceptional performance. Her work on social media was decisive in improving the company's image. But the documents didn't support these claims. There were no achieved KPIs. There were no projects signed by Claire. There was only one certainty. She had direct access to Jason and was always where he was. And most seriously, other cases began to emerge. 2 former marketing employees filed formal complaints. Both reported inappropriate behavior by Jason at closed events, invasive comments, veiled promises of promotion through personal proximity. None of them had had the courage to report before, but the video, the repercussion, and especially the strength that Emily awakened in so many women created a new scenario. They were no longer alone. The press began using terms previously unthinkable for such a celebrated CEO: toxic leadership environment, suspicious promotions, culture of silence. Jason finally found himself cornered and tried to react. He gave a brief interview to an economic newspaper, trying to control the damage. "My personal life doesn't interfere with business. I've always based my decisions on merit. I have nothing to hide." But it was too late. The narrative had already changed. It was no longer about a kiss at a concert. It was about an entire system fueled by power, silence, and unbalanced relationships. Claire, for her part, disappeared from social media, deleted all accounts, requested unpaid leave. Sources close to her say Jason cut contact, maybe due to pressure, maybe strategy, but the damage was done. Emily, upon learning everything, felt a mix of revolt and relief. Not because Jason had gotten involved with an employee, but because, finally, the mask had fallen for everyone. She was no longer the only one who knew about the darkness behind the shine. And now, other women were saying, enough, too. Velmark's administrative board met for the 3rd time in a week. This time, with a single agenda: evaluate Jason Miller's temporary removal. There was legal risk, there was reputation risk, but above all, there was an ethical risk that could no longer be ignored. Outside the company headquarters, protesters gathered. Signs with phrases like, "It's not just about Emily. Every company reflects its leader. Harassment disguised as leadership isn't leadership." It was the voice of those who, for a long time, only whispered. Now they shouted, with strength, with reason, with support. The interview was scheduled for a Wednesday, 6 p.m. New York time. The channel was discreet but respected, a journalist known for her humane tone, never sensationalist. The studio was small, almost intimate. Soft light, minimalist setting, cameras positioned so as not to intimidate. Emily arrived punctually, calm on the outside, boiling on the inside. In her hands, she held a small blue notebook, the same one where she wrote her first chronicles still in college, and the same one she had rescued weeks before after seeing the video. Outside, the world stopped to watch. Bars broadcasted on big screens. Influencers did countdowns on social media. Thousands of women created safe spaces to watch together, in homes, cafes, feminist collectives. It was more than curiosity. It was catharsis. It was hope. It was emotional justice. The presenter opened the interview carefully. "Emily, The whole world is talking about you, but today we want to hear from you." Emily took a deep breath. Her eyes were steady, her voice serene. "For a long time I got used to not being heard. When someone like Jason shines so bright, others around become shadows, and I was that shadow for 12 years. She spoke with clarity, without aggressiveness, but with a frankness that cut like a scalpel. "I'm not here to expose anyone, but to explain what happens when a woman gives up herself, little by little, in the name of a project that isn't hers. At first, you do it for love, then out of habit. And one day, you wake up and realize you've disappeared." She described, without melodrama, the slow process of annulment, the subtle exclusion from events, the passive-aggressive remarks, control disguised as care, the loss of her own voice. "I wasn't betrayed just with another body. I was betrayed with each absence, each indifference, each look that passed over me as if I were invisible." When the presenter mentioned the concert video, Emily took a deep breath. Seeing that was like watching the end of a movie I never wrote. He was there, free, passionate, visibly comfortable with someone who wasn't me, and the cruelest thing is realizing that man never had fear, because to him I hadn't been there for a long time. The tears came, without exaggeration, without hysteria, just human, like those of someone who recognizes, the end of an illusion. Emily also talked about how she almost abandoned the interview. "I thought about giving up yesterday. I thought I would be feeding a spectacle. But then I read a message from a 68-year-old woman who said, 'You're saying what I never could.' It was for her. It was for all of us." She read at the end a small excerpt from her own notebook. "I wasn't destroyed. I was silenced. And silence, when it explodes, doesn't scream, it echoes." In the final minutes, the journalist asked, "Do you still love Jason?" Emily hesitated, thought, and answered with the sincerity that marked the entire interview. "I love who he was. But today, I love more who I'm becoming without him." The impact was immediate. The interview, which would last 30 minutes, stayed on air for 2 hours, with extended blocks due to record audience. On social media, there was no other topic. Hashtags like "Emily spoke," "I am also a voice," and "I was silenced" dominated trending topics in 3 countries. Even those who had initially criticized her silence now understood her and, more importantly, identified with her. Emily hadn't just spoken. She had freed voices. Jason, on the other side of the country, watched everything, not in an office, but alone, in a hotel room where he was hiding from the press. For the first time, he had nothing to say. For the first time, there was no way to control the narrative, because for the first time, no one else wanted to hear his version. 3 days after Emily's interview, Velmark's administrative board called a press conference. With tense faces and rehearsed speeches, they announced, Jason Miller will be temporarily removed from the CEO position to facilitate internal investigation of ethical and administrative conduct. The news spread like fire. The company's stocks, which had plummeted in recent days, stabilized. Partners who had previously remained silent now spoke publicly. And in a rare turnaround in the corporate world, the fall of the company's most powerful man wasn't caused by financial scandals, but by a 23-second video and the strength of an invisibilized woman. Jason tried to react, issue statements, consult lawyers, plan a clarification video, but everything sounded too late, forced, useless. He had already lost what he valued most, admiration. The press no longer wanted to interview him. Lectures were cancelled. Magazines removed his covers. NGOs returned donations, and his name began to appear on lists of unmasked toxic leaders. Claire, the promoted intern, also issued a statement. She said she had been involved in an unequal structure, that she felt used, that she never imagined being exposed that way. Some attacked her, others embraced her. But the consensus was one. She was also a reflection of the system Jason created, and from which so many benefited in silence. Meanwhile, Emily received invitations of all kinds. Publishers wanted to publish a book with her chronicles and reflections. Universities asked her to speak with students about emotional autonomy. NGOs wanted her to lead campaigns about women's invisible role in great male trajectories. But she chose something different. She created a project called Space to Return, a cultural center for women who had left their careers, their projects, and their voices in second place to support partners, children, or systems. The name was symbolic, a place to rediscover not a job, but themselves. At the center's inauguration, Emily gave a brief speech, without attacks, without indirect references. Just truth. I was silenced by love, by loyalty, by fear. But I discovered that, contrary to what they say, pain is not an end, it's a restart. Here we don't offer formulas, we offer listening, because sometimes all a woman needs is someone who believes she still exists. The audience cried and gave a standing ovation. Behind the scenes, some Velmark employees also began to emerge from anonymity. They reported episodes of erasure, manipulation, and daily micro-violences, and each new statement further validated the importance of what Emily had initiated. The case reached classrooms, podcasts, television debates. Sociologists talked about selective merit culture. Psychologists explained how emotional invalidation can be as destructive as physical abuse. Women at home re-evaluated their relationships. Men in silence began to reflect. And Jason remained silent, not by strategy, but because for the first time he no longer had a stage. There was no more microphone, no audience willing to listen. His public image crumbled not from hate, but from irrelevance. He became what he feared most, dispensable. Emily, at the end of that month, received a letter, handwritten, unsigned. Inside, just one phrase. You won without shouting. That's more powerful than any revenge. She smiled, not because she beat Jason, but because she beat the system that said she could never exist outside of him. 3 months have passed since the interview. The videos still circulate, articles are still written, analyses still reverberate. But now, the pace has changed. The story is no longer just a headline. It became a study, reference, mirror. Emily walks among the rooms of the Space to Return, women sitting in conversation circles. Some resuming plans shelved for decades, others just listening, understanding they're not alone. She passes, discreetly, greets with her eyes, sits in the corner, and listens. She no longer needs to prove anything. She doesn't need to justify herself. She doesn't need to be the wife of. Now she's just Emily, and that is everything. Outside, society has also changed, not drastically, but something remained, a discomfort, an alert. The case exposed the romanticization of the visionary man figure, who ascends with the support of an invisible woman and discards her as soon as the world applauds him alone. It exposed how silence often is more cruel than screaming, and how there are thousands of Emilys living less media versions of the same story. On TV, a documentary is released. It's called She Was There All Along. It brings testimonies from women who sustained homes, companies, families, and were forgotten in the footnote of history. In the first scene, the narration says, "This is not just the story of a betrayal. It's the story of how the world learned not to see those who never stopped being present." And Jason sold his part in the company, didn't return to the spotlight, disappeared from social media. Some say he moved to the countryside, that he's writing a book about silent leadership. But nobody reads it, because now people want to hear other voices. On any given Sunday, Emily sits in her house's garden. She has hot coffee in her hands and the blue notebook on her lap. She writes something new, no longer to vent, but to create. She doesn't write about Jason, not about the video. She writes about a woman who thought she had lost everything, but in reality was just finding herself. She closes the notebook lightly, smiles, gets up, and goes to live. Because in the end, it wasn't about the video. It was about everything it represented and everything she stopped accepting to finally exist.